Hi there. This is Rabbi Rosenthal here. I see a number of people here already. Everyone is muted to start with, but you can unmute yourself and when you want to speak, when you want to participate. And I know there's a few people who I can see are here but don't have video showing. That's fine. You're more than welcome to block your video at any point if you want. I do hope, though, that people will participate as we get started and move along, and you'll have things to say, questions to ask, and so forth. I'm just gonna clean my hands quickly. Happen to have a rare bottle of Purell in my office here. It's so quiet. Can anyone just give me like a thumbs up to let me know you can hear me? Good. Okay. All right. Okay. I hear total silence on my end. But I do hope that when you have something to say, some contribution, some question, that you will unmute yourself. I see that Julia is with us from Santa Barbara. That's great. I see you, Julia. You're big on my screen right now. You're the one that Zoom wants me to look at. So, although I can see everyone else too. In terms of the chat feature, I'm not going to be relying on the chat feature so much. So if you guys send me stuff by chat, I'll try to look at it if I see it blinking, but I'm also liable to miss it because I find it really distracting. So I'd rather, if you have something to say, even just a small note or something, then please just unmute yourself and share. To unmute yourself, share with it, you move the mouse over the screen, and on the bottom left, there's a little picture of a microphone, and you just click on that microphone and it mutes and unmutes. Really simply, you can stop your video or add a video there too, just the same. All right, let me close this thing. All right, you'll see that on the top left of the screen tonight, we have a new addition there in the viewing pane. It says recording live on YouTube. I want to make clear to everyone what it is and what it isn't. We are not actually viewable by anyone right now, except the people here on this Zoom, okay? I thought about making it viewable on YouTube, but I decided not to because I thought it might inhibit people from participating. And I don't want anyone to feel inhibited from participating. All it is this being sent over the feed. This feed is being sent over to YouTube to be recorded privately. No one will be able to view it. No one can currently view it. No one will be able to view it later without our express consent. And the only reason I'm doing that is because last week, and even in preparation for tonight, there were a couple of people who said, oh, I missed it, and I've been coming, and I really wish that I could catch it, that one session. And so is it possible to record it or to get a recording? And so only for those very few people who have been participating until now and who can't come tonight or couldn't come last week, was I willing to share it with. I'm not going to share it with the general public. I don't want anyone to worry about that. Yeah, so, okay.
This is Rachel Ann Levy, Sinai Temple's Communications Director. If you do attend the class and you want the link afterwards, please email me. My email is rlevy, R-L-E-V-Y @sinaitemple.org. I'll put it in the chat.
Great, thank you, Rachel Ann. I am going to also share a link with you guys now, maybe two. Let me just pull this up. Actually, no, just one should be sufficient. You know what? I'll share them later when it becomes more relevant. We're going to be looking at 3 different texts tonight, XTS. We've been in this class looking at Jewish illness in the Jewish literature, the theme of illness in Jewish literature. And one of our regular participants, who I think couldn't be here tonight, but wants to get the recording, she has said several times, you guys will know who I'm talking about, those of you who've been here before, she said, this class is always so heavy, and it's always, the material is so, often it's so gross or it's so disturbing. And I was thinking about that in a bit. I thought, well, yeah, of course, because we're looking at texts about illness, right? That's by its nature, it's not a happy subject. Of course, we've been looking at a lot of theological texts that ask the question of why do people suffer? What's the meaning of suffering? And often that can be ugly as well. And I've tried to unpack that and soften it a bit, but there's no doubt that some of it's very ugly. Tonight, the texts that we're going to be looking at as we progress forward in time are not going to be so much theological or philosophical as much as they're going to be more social. And I think they'll still give us a chance to analyze them, to bring our own questions to them, and so forth. But you'll see what I mean. We're going to be looking at 3 poems by a famous medieval poet named Shlomo ibn Gvirol, Solomon ibn Gabirol, who just a little bit of background on who he was and the style of poetry he wrote, because we're going to be mainly looking into English. I'll provide Hebrew for those who want to follow along in Hebrew, but I'm going to, since I learned last week, I can only show one text at a time on the screen for the most part. We're going to be mostly just looking at the English text. And so I'll tell you that Ibn Gvirol was born in Malaga, which is a coastal city in what we now call Spain, but it wasn't Spain back then. It was the Iberian Peninsula, to describe the geography. And let's pull up a map here, actually. Let me see if I can get a map here for you guys to look at. Just give me a second. Make it more interesting that way, right? I have something to share here. Make sure I open the right one. I think, no, not that one. I have so many windows open on my computer. It's gonna be hard to figure out which one to share. Where did that go? You know what? Here's what I'm gonna do. I'm just gonna share. Oh, here. Oh, there it is. Okay, sorry for that. All right. Can you guys see the map now? This Google Maps image?
Yes.
Great. Okay, I'm gonna zoom out a little bit. It's gonna take you a second to reload. So Malaga is here in southern Spain, what we now call southern Spain. Back then, when he was born there, almost 1,000 years ago, almost exactly 1,000 years ago, he was born probably in 1021 or 1022. So really, we're talking almost exactly a millennium ago. Back then, southern Spain was Muslim territory. It was controlled by the Arabs and the Berbers from North Africa. And this was the very end of what we call the golden age of Spain. There were many Jews who lived there. There were a good smattering of Christians, but the rulers were Muslims. And, you know, there's a lot that can be said about the golden age of Spain. It's a lot that has been said about convivencia, about Jews and Muslims and Christians living along so well and liking each other. And you know, a lot of it's exaggerated, actually. It's complex. So certainly there were a lot of good years, and in a lot of places and times in that period, there were opportunities for Jews. And even Gvirol lived sort of at the very end of the peak of that time. And as I said, he was born in Malaga in about 1021, 1022. By that point in time, the tradition of Muslim Arabic poetry had already been well adopted by Jews and adapted into Hebrew. And we're going to see examples of that. Julia, I love your background. I just have to say, it's a bit distracting, but I really like it. Okay, so that is a very technical form of poetry, which in Arabic has to do with the interchanging. The meter is about the number of interchange vowels between short vowels and long vowels in Arabic. Hebrew doesn't really have short vowels and long vowels in the same way. They try to approximate the system in a different way in Hebrew, which I'm not going to worry about so much tonight, but I do just want to say that it's very difficult poetry to write and very difficult for our modern ears to appreciate how challenging it was to write. Ibn Gvirol was an expert at it. By the time he was 16 years old, his family had fled Malaga and they went north towards Saragossa, which we see up here, you know, in Aragon, what we now call Aragon, not too far from, you know, Barcelona, that part of the country, which of course then was not one country, but then Saragossa was under Christian control already. And he lived there with his mother. His father died somehow or another, and he lived there with his mother. And by the time he was 16, he had been taken pity on and became the charge of a rich man in town, and who sponsored him, and he sponsored him to write poetry for him and such, which was common at the time, you know, for Jewish artists and Muslim artists and Christian artists to have sponsors and to live in their homes even and perform for them. And so that's what he was doing by the time he was 16. And he was writing respectable poetry, Hebrew poetry, by the time he was 16. By the time he was 19, he was writing some of the most important Hebrew poems we have to this day, by the time he was 19 years old. By his late 20s, his mother also died. And for some reason or another, which is not entirely clear to us, he felt like compelled to leave Saragossa. He had to leave Saragossa. He was very unhappy with it, and he returned back to Andalusia, to southern Spain. And he seemed to wander around southern Spain and never really got his bearings again. And eventually he died in Valencia, we believe, on the eastern coast of Spain, in when he was about 36, 37 years old. So not a long life, and not by their standards, not an easy life. As an orphan, lacked, when he finally did have this patron in Saragossa, the patron, I think, got involved in court intrigue, and he himself was killed, which left even Guirol without a patron and with a lot of problems. And yet he still continued to have a fruitful career writing poetry. He also wrote philosophy, incidentally. It was only discovered about 100 years ago that a very, very famous Latin work of philosophy attributed to an Avicebron was actually Ibn Gavirol, and we had lost the original Hebrew of this work of Neoplatonic philosophy. It was only preserved in the Latin translation with the Latin version of his name. And the connection was made 100 or so years ago that this famous work, Fons Vitae, the Fountain of Life, was actually written by this Jewish philosopher, Ibn Gavirol, and poet. All right, but he lived a tough life, and he wrote many different poems. He wrote religious poems, he wrote devotional poetry to be used during Jewish services and prayer, and he also wrote a lot of personal poetry. And I'm going to look at a few examples of that tonight. So let me pull up the first one here. I'm going to stop this share of the map so I can find the right poem to start with. And I think it is, which window do I have it in here? That's the question. So many windows. Not that one. But here, yeah, here we go. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop the link into the comments section here. So if anyone wants to see the Hebrew, they can click on that link. Okay, that's for the Hebrew. Can you see the link in the comments? It's a very long link because all those different weird marks are actually Hebrew letters, and when you cut and paste the Hebrew letters, it turns it into code. So, but it's to a Wikibooks link, and it has a nice copy of very easy to read Hebrew there. And I'm going to pull up an English translation for everyone to follow along with, and share that to the screen now. Let me just make sure I get the right one. One more second. All right. In the three poems we're looking at tonight, I'm about to show you this one. The three poems we're looking at tonight, I'll tell you that I'm not enamored with any of the translations available to me, the translations available to me, which is to say, a lot of these have a lot of translations available. Now I get from my Zoom window. Okay, a lot of these have a lot of translations available. They've been translated many times, but with the libraries closed and most of my collections still in boxes, I had to really struggle to find some translations. So one of the translations is by Peter Cole, which is a decent translation. Not everyone likes his style. He's written a lot. He's written his own poetry. He's written a lot of translations of Hebrew and Arabic medieval poetry and modern poetry. And so that's Peter Cole. Another translation is going to be from the Penguin Book of Hebrew Poetry, of Hebrew Verse, which is kind of a stilted translation I don't love. And finally, one of the translations I did this afternoon. And so that's probably going to be the worst of all, but let's see here. Here we go. I'll share it. All right. Is everyone able to see this text on the screen in Word? 3 torments? Neria, give me a thumbs up if you can see it. Okay, good. Thank you. All right. So, and I am going to, for myself, to pull up the Hebrew just so I can comment on the Hebrew alongside the English, even if not everyone can understand the Hebrew, at least I can. I can make some comments on it. So let me just do that here. Oops, the wrong thing. I want this one. All right, here we go. So by the way, I'm starting with this one. Wait, which one is shared? Is the Hebrew shared or is the English shared? Can someone tell me?
The 3 torments in English.
English.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Good. Because it looks a little weird on my screen, but I'm glad 3 torments. And is it legible? Are you able to read it? Is it big enough? Okay.
Yeah.
Good, because I moved some stuff around on my screen and now it looks really weird. But I'm glad you can see it. I have to squint to read it myself. So I don't want to enlarge it because then it might be too big for you. So I'm starting with this one because I didn't know which one to start with, but I figured that since today was the Jewish and Israeli holiday of Yom HaAtzmaut, I'd start with the one that had the word Atzmaut or Otzma, selfness, in the first line. So it seemed appropriate. Otherwise, there's absolutely no connection to Israeli Independence Day, Yom HaAtzmaut. That's the only connection, is it just happens to have that word in the first line. So the Hebrew starts Ke'evi Rav. My pain is great, and my injury is mortal. And my strength ebbs, and my bones or my nature is weak. Okay? Bones or nature, that's actually the word, is atzmi, atzmut. It's an interesting word. Atzmut means like my selfness, but it probably means here, poetry then and now, they play with words a bit, and it probably means my otzma, my self, my nature, or my selfness is weak. But it also, that word is also evocative of the word atzamot, bones, right? I think that that's not a coincidence. I think you probably picked that word to kind of play on both meanings. Myself, my nature is weak, but also my bones are weak, okay? What's wrong with him? Well, we'll get to that eventually. I'll give you some suggestions of how he's ill. But, he starts telling you he's in a lot of pain, and it's mortal. It's a mortal injury. It's not something light. It's not something that's going to go away ever. There's no fleeing nor escape for my soul, no place to rest. Three things have gathered against me to annihilate the ravages of my body and my punished spirit. So there's going to be three things we're going to see in the next line that have come to annihilate the ravages of his body and his spirit. Great iniquity is the first, right? We're not sure what the source of that iniquity is, whether it's his iniquity or someone else's iniquity, but someone has done something really, really wrong, and now he's being punished for it, okay? We don't know more about that from this poem or really hints from any other poems. It's not clear. But maybe he just had a guilty conscience. I don't know. Tremendous pain, okay, so illness itself, and separation, herud. Now, this is an interesting idea. What's the separation? It could be alienation, that he feels alienated. And we know from some of his other poems that he did feel alienated. He felt like he had no one who could respect him and no one who he truly respected, that he could, catch their ear and get their attention. We also know that he was alienated. His parents both died. He was an orphan, and he had to leave his birthplace of Malaga, and he had to leave the place where he grew up and had his initial sponsor, Saragossa. So he was an alienated person. He was constantly separated socially, geographically, financially, in every which way. So these three things are all conspiring to cause great physical and spiritual injury. But who can stand before three? I'll point out here in the Hebrew, you don't need to look at it if you don't want to, but in the Hebrew it says ve'ein shlosha asfu okay, umi yachol amad lifnei shlosha, umi, and who. That umi, the vav before me, who, that vav in Hebrew can be a conjunctive vav, or it can be a disjunctive vav. There's a fancy way of saying it means either and, or it means but, or. It's unclear. You have to sort of read from context whether the person who says the word means and or but. In modern Hebrew, it almost always means and. But in biblical Hebrew, which is much more familiar even for your all, that's his source. Hebrew wasn't a spoken language then, so his poetry is based on a biblical Hebrew. It very much can mean but. It can be disjunctive. So we can read this either way. And who can stand before three? Or but who can stand before three? These three are conspiring, and yet who is it even possible to stand before all three of these? I am the sea, or the sea monster, my God. Are my bones iron or copper? Right? Oh, excuse me, I misread that because it's so small on my screen. Am I the sea or the sea monster, my God? Are my bones iron or copper? Anyone recognize that phrase? And remember to unmute yourself if you want to share. You guys clearly are not, brushing up your. Sorry.
But I recognize them not standing, because if you think about the Asher Yatzar in the morning, right? If things are closed or open, you can't stand before the throne of God.
Oh,
So is
interesting.
that in
Yeah.
reference to that?
Yeah, I think it's a reference to that phrase in general of being able to stand or withstand. Yeah, that's good. I think the reference here to the sea or the sea monster, or sometimes translated, especially in Christian translations,
The Leviathan.
is
The Leviathan?
well, Leviathan's a different word. That's Leviathan. This word is tanin, which is like
Right.
a sea monster or a serpent, a sea serpent.
Yeah.
This is from the book of Job. From the book of Job,
Okay.
which, I thought you guys knew it like the back of your hands, of course. A great story I was once told when I was in rabbinical school by the former head librarian of the library at Jewish Theological Seminary. He said that he was once, one of the professors asked him to take a image they had, a micro, what's it called? Micro, you hardly use these anymore. There's microfilm, a microfiche. I think it was a microfiche image of a manuscript of the Talmud. And he said, can you set this up for me? I don't know how to set up the machines, technically. He said, and, I want to be able to see it really, really big because the text is hard to read. So can you project it against a wall? So as the librarian, back then I think he was still an assistant, he said, sure, I set him up. And he said, I walked away, and the professor came back to me 10 minutes later. And he said, could you do me a favor? Can you come back here? So I said, yeah, sure. What can I help you with? He said, I figured that he was going to have a question, how to use the machine. He said, I want you to read it for me. I want you to read it for me. He said, well, you really need my help reading it? He said, well, I'm used to the text. I want someone else to read it for me. And he said, in that moment, he realized what was going on. The professor is a professor of Talmud by the name of Saul Lieberman, very famous professor.
I was gonna ask.
Yeah, really the foremost in his day, professor of Talmud. And the librarian was also a very respected librarian and scholar, and his name is Menachem Schmelzer. He's still alive, thank God. He was a Hungarian who was a refugee, World War II survivor, and then he was in Soviet-controlled Hungary, and eventually was a refugee, escaped and came to New York. He said, what was happening there is, if you're reading Torah from the Torah scroll, and someone thinks one of the letters is not clearly written, but it's not clear that it's a mistake, and it's debatable whether it's a mistake or whether it's correct. What are you supposed to do? And the halakha, the law, is you should call up a child who's old enough to be able to read, but is not old enough to know the text really, really well. And you ask the child to read the text for you. The child, not familiar with the text, will read what he or she sees. Of course, it would have been him back then in the Shulchan Aruch, in the Jewish law. They won't know what they're supposed to read, so they'll just pronounce it as they see it, right? He said, I, the librarian, was the child for the professor. The professor knew what was supposed to be written there, so he asked me to read it for him to see, what the child would get out of the text. So he said, I really struggled through the first line, but I eventually got it. And the second line, I just couldn't get it at all. And the professor said, what's wrong with you? It's a verse from the Bible. And I said, what do you mean it's a verse from the Bible? He said, it's from Job. You don't know it? You don't know the book of Job cold? Of course, everyone knows that. That wasn't even the hard part, apparently. But so whenever I see a verse from Job like this, I didn't recognize this verse. I only knew it from Job because I was looking at it with a commentary that told me it's a reference to Job. Okay, so am I the sea or the sea monster, my God? Meaning, am I something so massive, something so powerful that I can withstand all this? Or are my bones iron or copper that I could, withstand this? That at every moment, I'm surrounded by troubles, as though they're transferred to me as an inheritance. And think about that image for a second. And transferred as an inheritance. And this is truly a very, very Jewish image. I'll read you the Hebrew here to see if any of you pick up on any of the language of the Hebrew, if you haven't already in English. He says, Ke'ilu, as though hem misurim li Yerusha. Misurim li Yerusha. So two words there, misurim, misurah. Anyone recognize that word, misurah?
Tradition.
Tradition, Masorah. And Masorah is tradition. Yeah.
No, but this is from Tzara'at, which we read last week, Suris, right?
Oh, that's with a tzadi. That's with a tzadi. It's a very similar word. Yeah, that's tzadi resh ayin. This is mem samech resh. So it sounds similar. Maybe there's intentionally a connection there that it's supposed to sound like tzara'at.
Look, but the word trouble, it's tzara'at, it's tzuri, tzara'at.
That's true, yeah. Yeah, so maybe he is trying to evoke a similarity in language. But at first glance, the word is misurim, which means like mesura. It's famously known from the very beginning of Pirkei Avot, the Ethics of the Fathers. Anyone know what that very first Mishnah, how it starts, even in English? It says, Moshe kibel Torah misinai. Moses received the Torah at Sinai. Umisara, he passed it to Joshua and the elders. They passed it from one generation to another. It's this idea of passing something in a traditional way, something you've learned, something that you inherit, something that's given to you as a gift. And then, of course, an inheritance is a gift. It's something you get from your ancestors. Usually something you're very proud of, something you're proud to own, right? So this is, I've received a tradition from my ancestors, an inheritance. But what is this inheritance he's received? Troubles.
Yeah.
Right? Troubles. Right. Illness. Right?
The sins of the fathers.
Yeah. And maybe there's a notion here that he really feels that, that this is something that he's gotten from his family. Maybe whatever he suffered from was also something that one or both of his parents suffered from. I'm not sure. We don't have any tradition of that, but maybe this hints at that. Let's keep reading here. You demand only my iniquity, as though you have no demand of other humans. I put in the word other there. It's implied in the Hebrew, but it's not, explicit, right? So it's like you only demanded of me, but no one else. Check out the end here, the final two lines, the final two verses. Observe the suffering of your servant in his distress, how he is like an ensnared kite. I wasn't sure whether to put the word bird or kite. Bird named here as a kite. So I put kite, but it's not the kite that flies, like the toy. It's, it's the bird, okay? How he's like an ensnared kite. And to you will I forever be a servant, like the ensnared kite, it sounds like, except, and I will never ask for freedom. See what he does there at the very end?
Yeah.
Flips the whole thing on its head, right? At the very end, he's ensnared, he's a servant, he's a suffering servant, right? I'll forever be your servant, but I won't ask for freedom, right? I don't want freedom from service to God. I can find some sorts of pride in this, as if to say, if this is what you're asking of me, God, that's what I'll do for you. That's what I'll do. I won't hesitate to do that service. You almost imagine him abandoning God here, asking for his freedom, but no, he accepts his lot. Any comments or thoughts on this or questions about it before we move on? I see Mark Schneider. Yeah, Schneider with his hand up.
To me, he seems to have a self-destruct pattern, and he suffers a lot, and yet he doesn't want to escape from it. And it's like a Job-like pattern that if anything, God is doing this to him. And he recognizes that and he accepts that as God's will. But he doesn't have to live that way. It's his choice.
Yeah, I think it's a good observation. He's living in this tension. Even Gvirol's life was filled with tension, filled with lots and lots of tension. One poem I really thought to do tonight, but I decided not to, both because it's really not about illness so much, and it's also a long poem, but it's one of his most famous. It's called Leaving Saragossa. He writes it to describe the moment where he has to leave Saragossa. He describes how painful it is, and how he's an orphan, and how he suffers, and he's poor, and then you can almost imagine like an adolescent. He's like, and no one appreciates me, and no one here is smart enough to realize how much I know, and they're all a bunch of ignoramuses. He's heartbroken, and he's depressive, and I think that's really one of the keys to even Gvirol is he's a depressive. I think that he probably was very much depressive. It's tough to know from his poetry to sort of, some modern biographers try to look at the few clues we have about his life that are explicit, and then they try to glean a lot from his poetry, which is a dangerous game. It's a very dangerous game, especially for medieval poets, because it's tough to know when a medieval poet is following a genre and when they're actually expressing some true feeling they're experiencing. So a medieval poet in Spain might write all sorts of love songs. But does this mean that this is a love-struck individual? Or does this mean that this is one of the types of poems that you're supposed to write as a good poet? You're expected to write poems about love, and about gardens, and about wine. Does it mean that every single poet in Spain loved wine and gardens, and all of them were seeking love and could never find it? It was always unrecorded? No, it's genre. So that's how they wrote. And does the fact that that even Birol, like so many other poems, describe all sorts of philosophical issues about the soul, does that mean he was a deeply spiritual man? Perhaps it does, or perhaps that's also genre, and perhaps that's what his patron asked him to write, like so many other patrons, and so he had to write it. So it's very tricky to sort of look through his poems and try to pick to make a true image, a true biography of who he was. However, what really emerges from his poetry is the depressive nature and the no one appreciates me and I'm lonely and I'm really, really suffering physical pain. That is really particular to Yves Birol. That does not seem like it's a motif that anyone else, common to anyone else. It seems like it's truly a personal motif for him that seems to be reflective of his situation in life. Let's look at another one of his poems.
I have a feel, somehow I sense, a lot of lamentation, right, in his part. But then at the end, just the first two lines saying that I yield to you, he yield to God because he's truly accept his status as the suffering servant. And he said that I will never ask for freedom because he know God is in control, God's sovereignty. So he surrender.
Yeah, very, very good. Yeah. I have to imagine that he'd prefer to serve God with less pain, but he's willing to take his lot. I don't know if you can see, there's another poem here below, but I think I want to go to a different poem first and then come back to that one. So I'm going to stop this share for a second. I'm going to share something different. Give me a second to just figure that out. It is going to be over, not that one, but oh, where is it? This is the problem when I have too many things open on the computer. It's hard to figure out which one to share. Oh, maybe it could possibly be this one. Let's try this one. No, that didn't work. I'm wondering if maybe the little screen I have open here, I can't share. So let me try to import it into a web browser window so then you can see it there. So give me a second here. Yeah, that's gonna work. That's much better. Okay, give me 1 second. I'll finish that off and then I'll help you.
If you send the text out ahead of time, that might help too.
Yeah, I can never predict who's gonna join us though, so that's the problem. Okay, this one's gonna be a little small, but you'll see it in 1 second. I'm about to share it in 3, 2, 1. Can you see it?
Yeah.
Yes.
Sure. There we go. I would blow it up, except what happens when I try to blow it up is it gets too big. Right?
Yeah, no,
actually. So let's go small and okay. Let's how we.
As long as we don't have to read.
I'll read it for you, okay? So, and there's a Hebrew here too. Oh, I sent you that link before for the Hebrew, but then I forgot the page numbers, so I'm sorry about that. But okay, well let's read this one here together. So again, there's the Hebrew. This is from the Penguin Book of Hebrew Verse, I think it's called. It's a great little collection. It's an anthology. It was printed maybe in the 60s or 70s. You can still find it. It's been printed a number of times since then. I don't love the translations. If you're looking for an overview of Hebrew poetry from ancient until modern, well, at least until the 60s, so with English translations, this is a nice little work. The Penguin Book here, if I find it here. Penguin Book of Hebrew Poetry. Looks like, well, it's been reprinted a bunch of times. Well, that's a picture of penguin. I don't know if you guys can see. It looks like this. I don't know. Whatever. Let's just go here. So I don't recommend it for the quality or beauty of its translations, but for just its value as an anthology. Okay. So your showers of tears, do you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Your showers of tears, like a torrent, have made the plains rise like mountain ranges. Why not celebrate the grapevine? Why not sing the praises of wine, which could pursue your sorrows and make them flee as Yerovam, son of Nebat, fled to Egypt? All right, so we have a quote here at the beginning. You can see a little quote mark there, and they put it, the editor puts in the Hebrew and in English for us, which is nice that they put the little quote mark to show there's a speaker here. And what's the speaker saying? He's saying, you cry too much, right? You're always crying. Your showers of tears are torn. It makes plains rise up like mountain ranges. Why cry when instead you could be celebrating grape wine, right? You could be drinking wine like the rest of us, having a good time. And look, wine not only would make you feel good, but the wine would flood your sorrows away, right? Because wine's really good at doing that, at least in the short run, I guess. Okay? And what's the image there? Flee as Yerovam, son of Nebat, fled to Egypt. Can anyone tell us what this image is of Yerovam, son of Nebat, fleeing to Egypt? This is a biblical reference.
Yeah.
Maria, do you know this one? Did you read the book of 1 Kings? Have you gotten that far in your Tanakh class? I'm asking my son, but I don't know if he's listening.
No, I'm in Sheila's.
No, okay. So Yerovam is famous. He is a king of, later on he's going to be one of the kings of Israel. But earlier on in his life, he was in service to King Solomon. And King Solomon thought that maybe Yerovam was testing him a bit or challenging his power. And so Yerovam fled King Solomon because he feared for his life. He fled to Egypt. He lived under the protection of the Pharaoh of Egypt, as the Bible tells us, until King Solomon died. All right? So that's, he fled for his life, right? Is the point here. That you could be, why are you crying when you could be drinking wine? The wine would chase your sorrows away, and your sorrows would flee from here, just as Yerovam fled all the way to Egypt. Okay? I'm going to come back to that image, because it's a rather interesting image. So let's keep reading here first. Okay? So I answered him, right? I, presumably the voice of even Gvirol, the author himself, I answered him. This person is challenging me. Yes, the heart forgets its trouble and rejoices in wine, as does a man in riches. Right? Sure, yeah. Wine does help you, help you feel better, just like riches, helps a person feel better, I suppose. But disease has consumed my flesh and set the shreds of my body ablaze like brushwood. I've grown so thin that a nose ring could serve me as a crown and a ringlet as an ankle band. Look at the Hebrew here. Adeh hayu nizamim atarot. The nizamim, the nose ring serves as crown, right? And a bracelet serves as a belt, right? Is that what he says? As an ankle, a ringlet serves as an ankle band. Right? So he's using these biblical words, these great biblical words for jewelry to say, that's how small my body has become. Sickness burned my innards with fever like fire, till I thought my bones would melt. Sores infested my innards and carried out time's orders faithfully. Bones that are filled with suffering, how should they not disintegrate? I rage against the disease. It's wasted away my body. It's made me so weak that a myrtle looks to me like an oak. Of course, a myrtle is a very weak branch, very thin branch. It's one of the 4 species we use on Sukkot which we wave together, the lulav and the etrog. The myrtle is neither the lulav nor the etrog. It's one of the 2 other branches that we wrap with the lulav, right? It's the hadassah. It's the ones with the small leaves, or the myrtles, right? And it's a very gentle, beautiful branch and leaf, but it's very gentle and small. So he says, a myrtle, I'm so small and withered away that to me, in my eyes, a myrtle looks like an oak. Right? It's an exaggeration, of course, but it's a nice image. Well, maybe not nice. It's an interesting image, colorful image. And I rage against the night that spreads out its pensive gloom. Now, there's a couple ellipses here in the Hebrew. They don't show you in English. If you look, can you see my pointer moving around on the screen?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right. So if you look up here, there's an ellipses in the Hebrew and another one down here. And what's edited out of the English translation is a few lines in each place where at the top, before he really starts to talk about his own suffering, where he says, the heart rejoices, as does a man in his riches. He goes on and gives a bunch of metaphors, that this is like that and this is like that. Nice, poetry. It's interesting, it's stylistic, but it's not really about his suffering, which is what I wanted to focus on, and clearly what this translation wanted to focus on as well. And down here, where he says, I rage against the night that spreads out its tents of gloom. At this point in the poem, in the Hebrew, which is edited, it's not in the translation or the Hebrew here in front of us, there's a number of lines about how he looks at the night, how he looks at the stars, and they're teasing him. And what seems to be going on there is the poet is saying, I'm waiting and waiting and waiting through the night. I can't get to sleep because I'm in so much pain. I'm looking at the stars and the constellations saying, get out of here, move, go on. Basically saying, like, I'm counting till the morning. I'm trying to speed up time, but it's moving so slow through the evening. I'm trying to shepherd it. I have them move, but these stars that are sheep are so stubborn. There's great imagery there. But, they skip it here in the translation. I think fittingly for our needs also, it's a bit much. All right, so let's continue at the bottom here. Then when I asked, how is the east robed? He's asking the sky now, looking towards the east, because of course, what's he looking for in the east? He's looking for, it looks like Rosa's speaking, but I can't hear her.
Yeah, so the east is sunrise.
Exactly,
The east
sunrise.
is where the sun rises.
Exactly. So that's what he's looking for. He's waiting for the sunrise, which is apparently going to offer him some solace, a little bit feel better. So I say, how is the east robed? What's it wearing? What color is the east? And they, the stars answered, covered with blue and dawning light. And at last, when the dawn lifted up its flags and raised, and this is the end, raised its morning stars like banners, my innards were soothed, for they were filled with dew, and drops of water flowed upon me. And this is a very, very colorful image, this whole poem, all the imagery he has of all the pain he's going through. But also, there's something very interesting here, both two elements I wanted to point out to you. I'm sure you've noticed both of them. One is the conversational element. This other person says, why not just have a good time? Why don't you, why are you always complaining? Why are you always feeling terrible and crying? Why can't you just feel better? If you're in pain, just drink a little bit, have some wine, it'll make you feel better. And then saying you can't drink every problem away, right? When you're sick, you don't want to drink, right? And so it's a very interesting image of the alienation that the ill person feels, the person who's suffering a physical malady feels that the person around him, people around him really don't get. And of course, the physical malady plus the alienation from the people around him only contributes to him feeling depressive, and he can't even sleep a wink at night. The only thing that soothes him is getting through the night, finally getting to the morning. That's all that can possibly soothe him. And how alienating is that, and how depressing is that for him? The other thing I want to point out is the sleeplessness, right? The sleeplessness that he's unable to sleep through the whole night. I actually have heard some of the people who've been on TV talking about the coronavirus who've actually said, at least some of them have said that the experience of nighttime and sleeping is the worst part. I think Chris Cuomo said the beast comes out at night. That during the day he could sort of handle himself and handle the viral infection, but the night times are terrible and horrible. Interesting parallel to our text here. I think it's true of a lot of illnesses, right? Even the flu, right? Before we move on, just a word on Ibn Gvirol and his illness itself. It's not known exactly what he had. Poems like this and maybe the other ones we looked at and the one we will look at sort of hint at what it might have been. Some people theorize that he might have had tuberculosis of the skin, which I didn't know there was such a thing. I see David Aftergood is with us, Dr. Aftergood.
Rabbi,
So do we have any other doctors with us, by the way? I'm not sure we do. But
I wanted to make a comment regarding the poem. Mm-hmm. Okay, so the way the poem talks about all the pain that this person is suffering and how much weight he's losing and so on. But it ends with hope. It looks like it ends like after the darkness of the night, by seeing the sunlight again, he lived to see another day, and maybe he'll be better someday. So there's that hope at the end of the poem.
Yeah, it definitely does end on a nicer note. And that makes me wonder, talking before about motifs and genre and what's common and what's unique to this poem, to this poet. The whole motif here of illness and suffering is very much Yves Vingrouille. That's very particular to him. I can't help but wondering whether the positive, soothing ending might be him feeling like he needs to do that in his response, because no one really wants to get a letter which just ends with him saying, "I feel terrible." Right? Then maybe he feels, does he really feel better? Or does he just put this in because he knows that, you can't send a letter without a happy ending? But it's a good observation.
So is he sending this to somebody, or he's just writing to unload his soul?
That's a good question. This does appear to be some sort of a letter. I mean, it's in the third person when he says, "I answered him." In the Hebrew, it's anitiv. I answered him, but it's unclear. In fact, it even could possibly be that one poet sent him a letter in the form of a poem, and he responded in the form of another poem. And this is just being recorded in his diwan, in his collection of writings, which, by the way, is lost to us. We have individual writings of his, but we don't have like an edited diwan.
But also it's going from him, which is singular, to them. They answered. So there's some incongruence there. Something is not. There's something more. When they say they answered, could it be angels? Is he seeing visions?
I'm just looking for the "they answered." Oh, you know what? The "they answered" at the bottom, when it says, "Then when I asked, how is the East robe, they answered," he's talking about the stars.
Could you hear
there.
me?
Yeah. The "them," they answered is the stars, or the heavens are answering him metaphorically. I don't know if you can hear me, but it's in the Hebrew, "Ba'omri," when I said, "Ma levush kadim," how is the East robed? How is it? What's it wearing? Yeshivun, they responded to me. I think he's, especially because these last few verses here have been elided, they've been skipped over, but in this ellipsis. But I think it's the heavens are answering him. I don't think it's any individuals. But if I can, I just wanted to go back to just say some of the modern readers think that perhaps he had tuberculosis of the skin, which I didn't know there was such a thing. I looked it up. I'll warn you, I'm about to show you a gross picture or two, but I looked it up and I found on Wikipedia that the bacteria which causes tuberculosis, which normally affects the lungs, can also affect other parts of the body, including, you can have skin lesions from tuberculosis, lupus vulgaris. As you can imagine, lupus is in like a werewolf, vulgaris, vulgar, you can see it's in this image, it's not very attractive. They say it's disfiguring and also apparently very, very painful. Here's apparently existed more than the 19th century. Here's someone who is a real picture, a real photograph of someone who had it. So some people think that he might have had this condition, but we don't know really what he had. He didn't name it, obviously. All right, I'm going to stop sharing that, and I'm going to share our final text. And for this one, I think I have to, you know what? Does anyone want the Hebrew? If you want the Hebrew, speak up now. Otherwise, I'm just going to jump to the English and not worry about finding the Hebrew for you. Anyone want the Hebrew?
Please.
Yeah? Okay. All right. Let me find it quickly then, and I'll send a link. Give me 1 second here. All right. Here it is. Actually, this isn't going to be so bad. The question is just what page it's on here, but I can find that. Let me send this link first so you can load it. Here's a link I'm sending for the Hebrew, and then I just need to find out what page number. I can ask my wife and son who are over there if they can grab there's a little piece of paper where I have all my papers on the counter. There's a little one with a bunch of numbers on the left and some Hebrew words on the right. Sarah or Neria, can you find that little piece of paper and bring it over? That looks right. Yeah, I can't read it because the screen's too small, but let me ask you to read to me. Actually, you know what? Let me blow it up so I can see you better. Can you hold it up to the screen again? That is hard. Okay, okay. Page 214. Okay, so if you want to look in the Hebrew with that last link, I think you need to go down to page 214 of the PDF. The PDF has 221 pages in it. You can go to page 214 of the PDF. It's in the pagination of the original printing of the book on the bottom right of the page. It's page 202. But it'll be easier just if you go to page 214 in the PDF. It's so it's Ke'evi Rav. Ke'evi Kaf Aleph Bet Yud Rav Resh Vet. That's it there. Okay, and now I'm going to do a screen share of the English so that everyone else can follow along with that. Let me pull it up here. And this is a Peter Cole translation. He's a professional translator. Are you guys able to see this one? My condition worsened. Is that visible on the screen to you?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, good. So my condition worsened, and worsened my grief. And in its wake, my strength waned. But then your letter arrived with its call, and its pleasures eased my pain. So think about that beginning. So here we have, it's like it almost jumps to the end of the other poems, right? We have the social construct, you know, coming all the way to the beginning of the poem. The last one we read, you know, the questioner says, why can't you just feel better? Why are you always feeling bad? And he's asking the wrong question. Here, clearly this person asked the right question. My condition worsened and worsened with my grief, and in its wake, my strength waned. But then your letter arrived with its call, and its pleasures eased my pain, right? There's nothing like a good, you know, call or letter from a friend to make you feel better when you're not doing well. So I'm writing you, not with news of my illness, but to ask instead a friend's forgiveness. Because I haven't been able to visit, I swear I'll come if I have to crawl. For I know that the minute I see your face, I'll be healed as my grief withdraws. Now, to be fair, it seems that you know, he might not be ill here. He's obviously grief-stricken, is what he's writing about. He does say ke'evi, my pain, my injury, you know, worsened. But it seems like maybe he's not talking about his physical ailment here so much as his grief. Maybe the grief of losing his, one of his parents we lost in his early days, or maybe it's the loss of his patron, or maybe it's the grief of having to flee Saragossa, or any other of the grievous things he faced in his lifetime. But regardless, I think it still gives us a sense of this idea of grief and suffering. And what I think is interesting about this one is, again, the social construct we have here, that when someone's suffering, one of the best things they have, one of the best, you know, the last one we had was that mourning can bring some sort of solace. You know, going through a difficult night and seeing the end of the night and seeing the dewdrops and the morning light come can make someone feel better. Well, here it's a visit from a friend who makes him feel better. He says, I'm not going to tell you about my illness here, right? I'm going to apologize that I haven't been in touch with you, right? And I swear to it, I'll come crawling to you if I need to pay you a visit. Because why? Because I owe it to you and you're my friend, but also I know that seeing you will heal me. And what a beautiful lesson, I think, for us to end on tonight, especially using, you know, Zoom, this class by Zoom, that we can actually see each other, or at least some of us can see each other, you know. And I think that, you know, some of us are, whether we're feeling physically ill or feeling lonely in our stay-at-home orders, you know, being able to come together to congregate in one form or another is, I think, very healing. And I think that even Gurul shows us that very clearly. I think that this is a true feeling that he's experiencing here. So any questions or thoughts on this one?
That's really nice.
Thanks. Yeah, I like it too.
Pleasure to meet everyone down in Los Angeles.
Great. Was that is that Julia?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for joining us. Thank you all for joining us. It's a pleasure to have everyone from all sorts of different parts of the country.
Rabbi, you know, I don't know if Sinai can do this if Rachel's still on, but if you have people register like we do for the Hillel classes and stuff, then they send out the source material.
Yeah, that's an idea. Although,
I also make a recommendation. Hillel's having Aviva Zornberg Sunday morning at 10. She's an incredible Torah teacher. If you've never listened to her, it's free. I don't know if it was free or it was a donation, but she's well worth hearing, and they'll send you all the source material.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a good recommendation. Aviva Zornberg is a wonderful teacher of Torah who lives in Jerusalem, has written, authored a number of books. And yeah, you know what, you mentioned it, Linda. I remember that I had seen that she was going to be speaking at Hillel this spring.
Right, right.
Apparently
so
now
it's the same Sunday she would have spoke, except it's from Jerusalem.
It's a great opportunity. Out of curiosity, so I know that most of us here are in Los Angeles, even in Westwood, but I know Shirling is joining us from Milwaukee and Julia from Santa Barbara. Anyone else from other parts near or far? Or sorry?
Well, that's the good thing about Zoom. They can.
Yeah.
My mom's cousin is a professor at Pitzer of Jewish religion.
Oh, great. Wonderful.
His name's Phil Zuckerman. I don't know if you know him.
I don't know him, but it's a familiar name. So.
Yeah.
All right, well, great. Well, as I said before, I promise I will not share this except with individuals who, make very specific requests. I know at least one of the individuals who asked me last week if she could have a recording is now joining us this evening. So just to prove that that's why we're doing it, but otherwise I won't be sharing it publicly.
Do you have a time frame of how many classes, or this is going to go on as long as the virus?
It's interesting you asked that, Linda, because each week I've been asked by our programming department, are you going to continue this next week and beyond next week? And so far I've said, let's see how this week goes. And last week was a little sparse, so I was a little unsure whether we were going to go past, next week. But this week is better attended, and I like the participation. This week is a little bit up, so that's good. And so if we still continue to see good participation and attendance, and if I still find texts which I find interesting and you find interesting, then I'll continue to do this subject, or otherwise at some point maybe we'll switch topics or something. So I have one or two more.
I'm gonna have a conflict later on.
Rabbi, could you spell the name of this poet to me, please?
Sure. You can actually see it here in the last link that I showed. Where it says it's Shlomo or Solomon. I'll write it out here. Solomon or Shlomo Ibn Gabirol. That's his Hebrew name. Ibn is the same as Ben. Ibn is actually Arabic for son of. His father probably wasn't Gabirol. It's probably almost like a family name. I think his great-grandfather was Gabirol. Ibn Gabirol is not literally the son of Gabirol, but like the descendant of Gabirol. That's his name. Very, very famous poet, also known as Rashbag. Rashbag for the acronym. Rabbi Shimon ben Gabirol.
Okay, thank you so much.
Of course. Yeah, one of the most famous medieval Hebrew poets. So. And also known as a philosopher. If you Google him, you'll find him on the Stanford Philosophy website and many other places. All right, well, thank you all for joining us. It's been nice seeing you and learning with you, and hope everyone has a good night. Bye-bye.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.